Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking on a single, world-shaking novel,
Oh, this is a big one.
Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, and we want to use it as a kind of philosophical, well, a wrecking ball, really.
A wrecking ball, yeah, to expose the foundations of modern morality. Perfect analogy. This
Yeah.
deep dive isn't just about, literary analysis.
No, not at all.
It's basically an ethics class that's been wrapped up in a psychological thriller. Our sources analyze how Dostoevsky just sets up this direct battle between two totally opposing worldviews.
Right. You have the cold calculations of consequentialism, and then the sheer audacity of the Nietzschean Übermensch, the Superman.
And all of that is countered by Dostoevsky's own vision, his powerful defense of what you'd call personalist ethics, natural law, and, the sanctity of conscience itself.
You know, the original working title for the book was apparently A Criminal's Confession.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're trying to do here. We want to understand what causes Roger Raskolnikov, this brilliant but dirt poor student, to decide to commit murder.
He's a man who's just absorbing these strange, fragmented, incomplete ideas, as Dostoevsky puts it, that are just floating in the air of St. Petersburg at the time.
And to really get at the start of it, at the genesis of the crime, you have to look at this raw psychological stuff Dostoevsky uses.
Oh, absolutely. He anchors Roger's whole tormented mind right at the beginning with this visceral, unforgettable dream.
The dream of the horse.
The dream of the horse. Roger dreams of this tiny, helpless horse being just brutally whipped and beaten to death by its owner. It's a moment of just pure, pointless evil.
It's the cruelty that serves no purpose. And our sources point out Dostoevsky actually saw a similar scene in his own childhood.
Which is just incredible.
But here's where it gets really chilling, the historical echo. That exact same image, the confrontation with the brutally beaten horse, was the very thing that apparently triggered Nietzsche's public mental breakdown years later.
It's almost like a prophecy embedded in the novel. Dostoevsky captures the exact psychological shock that can just shatter a mind, That sudden, overwhelming exposure to how indifferent the world can be.
And it perfectly sets up Rodia's terrible internal question. If the world is this cruel, if suffering is arbitrary, why should he have to obey some arbitrary moral law?
And he pretty quickly finds his answer, or what he thinks is an answer, in philosophy.
Starting with a very classic utilitarian justification. It's cold, it's clean, and it's all based on math.
Exactly. He's looking for a philosophical permission slip for an atrocious act. And the logic he uses is straight out of Bentham's utilitarianism.
Yeah.
The goal is always the greatest good for the greatest number.
He even overhears this conversation in a tavern that spells out the entire rationale for him. It's like fate is handing him the excuse.
And they call it simple arithmetic.
The numbers are simple, but they're morally monstrous. The student in the tavern says, basically, kill her, take her money, and with the help of it, devote oneself to the service of humanity. For one life, thousands would be saved. One death, and 100 lives in exchange. It's simple arithmetic.
The old pawnbroker, Alyona Ivanovna, she's seen as useless, even malevolent. So her death becomes, in this twisted logic, functional. It's useful for society.
But that's just the first layer, isn't it? The initial veneer.
Oh, absolutely. What's truly dangerous is how fast this utilitarian idea gets combined with the concept of the superior man, the Übermensch.
So it stops being about the good of society and starts being about him.
Precisely. His mind fuses the objective calculation, what's good for everyone else, with the subjective calculation of his own personal destiny.
He starts reading history, convinces himself that great men, figures like Napoleon, they can and maybe even must commit crimes, step over moral lines, if their final goal is, lofty enough.
He wants to be a new Napoleon.
Yeah. And the really fascinating thing here is the chronology. I mean, Dostoevsky is writing about Rodia, this exceptional man who thinks he's beyond good and evil, 2 full decades before Nietzsche even published Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
He was reacting to what was in the air in Russia in the 1860s, this rise of scientific determinism, materialism. He saw where that logic was headed.
So he wasn't just observing some kind of Napoleon worship. He was anticipating the total deification of the self.
Exactly. If there is no God, then man can become a god.
Yep.
And while Nietzsche really admired Dostoevsky, he talked about an instinctual feeling of relatedness to him. Dostoevsky just fundamentally rejects the premise. He's showing that the superior man idea is a philosophical dead end.
And the novel proves it, because Rodia's utilitarian excuses, they just collapse.
Right.
The money, saving his family, the good of society. He hides the stolen goods under a rock and basically forgets about them. The crime wasn't for them.
It was an experiment on himself.
Which leads to his real confession, the one he gives to Sonya.
The agonizing one. He tells her, I wanted to murder without casuistry, to murder for my own sake, for myself alone. I wanted to find out then and quickly whether I was a louse like everybody else or a man.
So it wasn't about saving anyone. It was about proving to himself that he had the authority to transgress, to break the law.
The authority to be Napoleon.
That's chilling. So if that's the sickness, how does Dostoevsky show the link? How do you get from utilitarianism, which seems to be about society, to this radical nihilistic Übermensch idea? They sound like two different things.
But Dostoevsky draws this incredibly tight chain of logic between them. It all starts when the intellectual mood manages to get rid of God and absolute transcendent truth.
Okay.
Once you do that, the whole concept of morality, the very distinction between good and evil, it loses its anchor. It just becomes arbitrary. Subjective.
So if the moral rules aren't from God or nature, they're just social conventions we made up.
Exactly. And once morality is just a matter of opinion, the new objective standard becomes functionality. It's not about good versus evil anymore. It's about useful versus useless.
I see.
And since state laws and social rules are then seen as just, functional tools to keep society running smoothly, the Übermensch, the superior man, feels totally justified in imposing his own free will as the only real standard.
Because the other rules are just for the herd, for the common people. They don't apply to him.
He's exempt. You see this logic all over Dostoevsky's later work. Our sources bring up Ivan Karamazov, who says, if you were to destroy in mankind the belief in immortality, nothing then would be immoral.
It removes the ultimate consequence for your actions.
Or, even more dramatically, you have Kirillov in The Possessed, who just comes out and says it, if there is no God, then I am God. The superior man replaces divine law with his own will. And that is the ultimate danger Dostoevsky is warning us about.
Okay, but couldn't a strict utilitarian, say a follower of Bentham, argue back? Couldn't they say that a code based purely on measurable utility is an objective moral standard? It's just one based on, observable reality, not metaphysics.
And that's the absolute key to Dostoevsky's whole counter-argument, which is rooted in what we call personalist ethics.
Okay.
For Dostoevsky, utilitarianism fails because it fundamentally treats human beings as countable units in a math problem. It assumes every single person has a price.
So you have these two totally opposed views of human dignity. On one side, utilitarianism says every person counts as one, and, well, they can be sacrificed for the universal good.
Correct. But personalist ethics, which has these deep roots in Aristotelian and Christian thought, insists that every single person carries infinite, non-negotiable dignity.
Yeah.
You cannot subject an individual to a calculation where they just become collateral damage.
It's a lot like what Kant called the categorical imperative, right? Our sources highlight this. You can't use people only as a means to an end.
Never. They're always ends in themselves. And Dostoevsky doesn't give us a lecture on this. He illustrates it through the most powerful scene in the book. The confrontation between Rodya and Sonya.
Sonya, the suffering prostitute who sacrifices her own dignity every day to save her family. She's the living embodiment of this idea.
And Rodya has just confessed everything, not just that he killed the cruel pawnbroker, but also the innocent Lizaveta, who happened to be Sonya's friend.
And most people, their first reaction would be to focus on the victims, on the consequences.
Oh, Sonya doesn't. It's an astonishing moment. She doesn't focus on the two dead bodies. She looks at Rodya and she grieves for him.
Wow.
And this is the monumental shift. Utilitarian ethics asks, what did you do? Personalist ethics asks, wretch, what did you do to yourself?
That changes everything. It's not about the police or what society thinks. It's about the actor's own soul.
Yes. Consequentialism sees us as the parents of our deeds. We claim paternity. We're responsible. But personalist ethics sees us as the offspring of our deeds. We are fundamentally changed by what we do.
The crime destroyed Rodya from the inside out.
It did. He lost his dignity the second he committed that crime for his own sake. And the suffering, the penance he has to go through in Siberia with Sonya, that's not just punishment. It's the painful process he needs to recover the very dignity that his own self-affirmation destroyed.
This idea that the moral law asserts itself internally, that feels like it has parallels way beyond a Christian worldview. Our research pointed out Dostoevsky has a lot in common with Eastern thinkers here.
Like Gautama Buddha, yeah.
Both philosophies seem to say that you can't find real peace until you renounce your selfish desires, your egotism.
That's a crucial point. For Dostoevsky, just like for the Buddha, experience will always teach you that the egotism of the Übermensch is just a vicious illusion. Roja cannot function. He can't find peace until he rejects the prideful I that led him to murder in the first place.
Now, this is where a critical listener might jump in and say, okay, fine, this redemption arc works if you share Dostoevsky's faith. But what about the rest of us? If I don't believe in Christian ethics, why should I care about Roja's torment?
And that is the exact secular challenge that Dostoevsky answers, primarily by invoking the idea of natural law. His universal argument is that nobody is more of a prey to evil and self-destruction than the person who believes they can put themselves above good and evil.
He's arguing that you can't build a functioning society where moral values are just arbitrary agreements.
Because then they can be arbitrarily thrown away. The most powerful historical example of this has to be the Nuremberg trials after World War II.
Right.
If all laws were just, local agreements, then the Nazi criminals could have just said, hey, we were just following the law in our country. But the court rejected that. The judgment was based on transcendent moral norms, a natural law that exists above any one nation's laws.
And Dostoevsky is arguing that Roja is guilty of violating that same universal truth. The classic definition comes from Cicero, right? He called true law right reason, consonant with nature, constant and eternal.
Yes, and Cicero speaks directly to Roja's internal suffering when he describes the penalty for disobeying this law. He warns that the person will be in exile from himself. Insofar as he scorns his nature as a human being, by this very fact, he will pay the greatest penalty.
Even if he escapes all the other things that are generally recognized as punishments.
That is a perfect description of Roja's descent into delirium. Before the police inspector's even onto him, he can't eat, he can't sleep. He's already suffering the greatest punishment. Exile from himself.
It's such a stark contrast to a modern take on this, like Woody Allen's film Match Point.
Our sources note that film is directly inspired by Dostoevsky, but it presents a perfect crime where the killer gets away with it completely, at least externally. He thrives.
But Dostoevsky insists that the torment of conscience is inescapable, whether you're a believer or not. He's universal because he shows that every human being, deep down, perceives something holy, something inviolable in human life that can't just be subjected to a functional calculation.
And that dignity is what saves us from nihilism. The alternative is a total betrayal of yourself.
So we're back at the crossroads that Roja faced. This whole deep dive really presents you with two fundamental paths. Either God or an equivalent natural law exists, and that leads you to an ethics of the good, of inviolable dignity.
Or they're abolished, which inevitably, Dostoevsky argues, leads you to the criteria of utility, and that utility is either calculated for society or it's ruthlessly claimed by the individual Übermensch.
And that choice is just as current today as it was then.
It is, especially when you think about the psychological cost of rejecting that moral law. Kafka once wrote, "The fear of death is merely the result of an unfulfilled life. It is a symptom of betrayal." Roja's struggle is this desperate refusal to face his own self-betrayal.
And if you're still sitting there wondering about the rationality of it all, of staking your life on good over utility, we have to leave you with Pascal's famous wager.
Right. Pascal says to just compare who has the most to lose if their fundamental bet turns out to be wrong.
If you bet on utility and you're wrong, you face this eternal moral deficit.
But if you bet on the good and you're wrong,
Yeah.
you've just lived a moral life.